Welcome to this MintPress live stream. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. Thanks for everyone for joining us today. Today's stream is going to be looking into Israel's so-called buffer zone in South Lebanon and the asymmetric warfare tactics that Hezbollah has been using to combat it, and the so-called ceasefire agreement that allegedly continues to take hold. But before we begin this live stream, and all the work we do at MintPress is supported by our members. So we call on you to join us for as little as $5 per month on Patreon. We were banned on PayPal and GoFundMe and had our fundraisers taken down and targeted by the Israel lobby and an Israeli OnlyFans model. So we need your support to keep MintPress alive so that we can continue exposing the stories the corporate media refuses to touch. Just so everyone is aware, we will be doing these live streams on Mondays at 4 p.m. CST, so make sure to tune in every week for the latest. So to start this up, first of all, we're going to, before we get into what's happening on the ground in South Lebanon, and really this impacts all of Lebanon and its future, we're going to take a look at what's been happening when it comes to the Iran negotiations, which are supposedly about to take place, but Iran has not confirmed this. The United States has not confirmed this. We don't know exactly what's going to go on. It looks like it could collapse one moment. The next moment, Donald Trump is claiming that there is a peace deal on its way and it's coming and that he is in a strong position. So right now we're in a pretty tough position because the United States decided to seize a vessel, and Iran has vowed retaliation. It didn't immediately retaliate, according to its military spokesperson, because of the fact that there were Iranians, there were passengers, the crew on board of the vessel that was seized by the U.S. military after being struck. So they decided not to immediately launch a retaliatory attack. So that, of course, has been in the news lately, and Iran's retaliation. And Trump has, for some reason, denied being under any pressure to make Iran make a deal with Iran, despite the fact that the ceasefire deadline is coming in quick. So a lot of people have been asking questions as to what will happen here. It's possible that the so-called ceasefire, and I call it a so-called ceasefire because really, the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. The Lebanon front, there was a 10-day ceasefire declared, but that really hasn't taken hold. The Israelis are continuing to aggress, and it looks like everything is about to explode. So there is a chance that they will extend this deadline. And there's also a chance that at any moment war could break out. The Iranians claim that they're anticipating a surprise attack at some point. So very likely that we'll see action in the near future. So turning our attention now, and this will be what we focus on today, because what is happening inside of Lebanon, although people may think that the war is somehow over now, it's very much ongoing. And for the people of South Lebanon, many of whom cannot return either because of the fact to their villages, either due to the fact that the Israeli military is operating there directly, or the fact that the Israelis have completely wiped out their village. There's nowhere to return to. They've destroyed their homes. It is very much an ongoing battle. And also, as of this morning, we heard that Hezbollah is now retaliating directly against the Israelis using IEDs. But just so everyone's aware of what's happening at this time in South Lebanon, I'm going to pull up some footage here. This is footage from Vintage Bil, which is in the south of Lebanon, which we went through on the last live stream, the symbolic importance of this area. And this is what the Israelis have been doing during the so-called ceasefire period, continuing to completely obliterate entire towns and villages off the face of the earth. So as you can see in this footage here, the Israelis are annihilating everything. They want to completely purge the presence of the Lebanese people in the south altogether. They're wanting to destroy what remains of South Lebanon and force the people into a position where they simply cannot return to their homes, because again, there's nothing there. Despite this, people continue to return. This is another video I'm going to pull up here because this footage, it goes on for quite some time. The entire area is just devastated. And see, this is not just because, as Israel claims, that they were targeting Hezbollah fighters in the area. This is a ludicrous justification for what they have been doing there. It's very clear this is deliberate, like it was in Gaza. The footage that you'll see out of Beit Hanun or Jabalia camp or Verge or anywhere else in the Gaza Strip, Rafah, is just like this. And the Israelis, in fact, during the so-called ceasefire period, which they began violating within an hour, they violated it over 10 times. They have brought in civilian contractors to help them demolish buildings in the south of Lebanon, to completely flatten towns in the south of Lebanon. And they're going after absolutely everything. They're destroying everything in their sight, flattening it all. And just, again, this is another part of Bint Jbeil in the south of Lebanon, and this is what it currently looks like. So what they're doing is, just as they did in the Gaza Strip, they are burning the homes of Lebanese civilians in the areas where they are concentrated. And just so everyone is aware, this is the map that has been put out by the Israelis. Now, this is the area that the Israeli military claims that it's taking as its buffer zone in the south of Lebanon, and that it has full operational control in these areas. So the Israeli military has a presence in many of these areas, but this map, which has been passed around by many, is rather misleading. Because the reality is, on the ground, despite the fact that this is what Israel wants to hold, and this is the alleged buffer zone that they seek to occupy and really annexed from the Lebanese state, it's not actually what they currently hold. This area that you see in the red, the Israelis have a presence, but when the Israelis go into an area, and this is the same thing that we saw in the Gaza Strip, the Israelis send in their forces in their armored personnel carriers, their D9 bulldozers, and their tanks. And they do not clear every single building in a village. They do not clear the entire area. They don't often have infantry next to their tanks. They just throw their soldiers into an area, go set up base in somebody's home or in a hospital or in a school, demolish everything around them in sight, and they use the air support when they're doing it. They don't clear all of the terrain around them. They haven't actually checked when they enter an area whether there are Hezbollah tunnels in their proximity. And in fact, the Israelis have been rather frustrated because Hezbollah is using drones to monitor their positions and to monitor their troop movements. And what we've seen in the past 48 hours or so is that Hezbollah it's shifted gears. During the ceasefire period, what it's done, and it's implemented a plan in order to achieve its goals here, which we have to consider has been something that Hezbollah had considered would take place, that there would be a temporary cessation of hostilities and they would have to shift gears like this. They've left behind fighters in the south of Lebanon to specifically plant IEDs and detonate them on Israeli tanks and armored personnel carriers. So what they do, and they're experts at doing this, is they track and they monitor Israeli forces and their movements. And they anticipate where the Israeli forces are going to be before they plant IEDs and then detonate them. And Hezbollah, in their first official statement claiming a retaliatory attack against the Israelis since the ceasefire began, announced that they destroyed 4 Merkava tanks in the south of Lebanon. And they managed to, as well, inflict a number of injuries on Israeli forces in a clash in another case, in another battle that broke out, according to reports. But the official announcement said that they saw the tanks burning, which would mean perhaps these are tank kill hits that they achieved in the south of Lebanon. And that seems to be the large majority of Hezbollah's actions and what it will be seeking to do in retaliation to the Israeli forces. And this sort of asymmetric warfare is something that Hezbollah, actually, it goes back to its roots. It's very used to doing this. So these guerrilla warfare tactics are something that favors Hezbollah heavily. So they may not be using their anti-tank guided munitions and engaging in the same kind of clashes, but now they present another problem to the Israeli soldiers, because the Israeli soldiers, when they're entering, and they might have used the road 5 or 6 times before, but they don't know if this time heading down that road is going to be their last, because there's an IED planted on that road. And of course, Hezbollah, they possess very powerful explosives, and they're very well trained at monitoring the Israeli forces. Now, we saw some of this in Gaza, where some of the Israeli munitions were repurposed by the likes of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, their Saraya al-Quds armed wing, and the Qassam brigades of Hamas and others, who repurposed Israeli munitions and detonated them. But the terrain in Gaza and also the experience of the fighters in doing this is different to Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as well, the terrain of southern Lebanon that they're working with is very, very much to their favor. And if we just pull this up, I think it's important to just look at this really on a map. Just going to get this up here if I can. Well, I think I've lost it. Here we go. Just so we can pull up a map here of South Lebanon. Okay, so just so everyone is aware, this is a very, very mountainous terrain. It's very tricky for the Israeli military to operate. There's a lot of valleys. Obviously, there as well. There's many places for Hezbollah to hide. And so when Israel gives you this map, which we pulled up a moment ago, where they've got this whole buffer zone that they call in the south of Lebanon, and that they include Bint Jbil in this area, the Israelis may be scattered, all over the place in different areas, right? But they're not occupying the whole territory. They haven't cleared it. And so Hezbollah is still there, operating, waiting for them, planting IEDs and then detonating them. And this is terrifying to the Israeli military. All day, the Israeli media has been commenting about how this is a massive disruption for them, that this was not anticipated. The Israeli media have been going absolutely nuts about this, because now, instead of fighting Hezbollah in the way that they were before, this asymmetric warfare, the tactics that Hezbollah are using, especially with these IEDs, are shocking the Israeli military. Because again, if you're an Israeli, and this is a citizens' army, this is a conscript army, so these people who are these Israeli soldiers, these 19-year-old sergeants, they give them their ranks sort of like participation trophies. And you're, riding along in your tank in South Lebanon near Bint Jbil or Taibe or anywhere else. You've been on this road before. You don't know anymore that what's actually lying in front of you, and you could lose an arm, a leg, or your life. And the more this goes on, the more fearful the Israeli soldiers are going to be. We have to keep in mind that during the war itself, now we're in a ceasefire period, the Israeli soldiers' families, their parents, were writing letters to the senior leadership, begging them to pull their sons out of South Lebanon. Now they're operating there, having a great time, destroying statues, burning mosques and churches, destroying schools and homes. But they'll hear every single day that another IED exploded. And now the Israelis, they only commented on these IED attacks on their convoys after Hezbollah officially announced it. But before that, they were passing it off as if, and there were 3 different instances that had occurred within a 48-hour period. And they passed it off as if this was just munitions that were left behind before and just happened to have exploded and inflicted 37 casualties on their soldiers. Now, for everyone who was looking at that and thinking that this is an awfully large amount of casualties and a lot of different explosions in different areas for this to be pure coincidence. And of course, it wasn't. It wasn't just coincidence. The Israelis were trying to pass it off as if, this was nothing and this was not actually carried out by Hezbollah, but it was. And part of this, again, is because they're just so accustomed to lying about absolutely everything that happened, about their casualties, about how those casualties happened. They'd rather announce that, the tank rolled over and their soldiers were injured in that way. We will have footage come out of tank kill hits, and they won't acknowledge it in some cases, or in other cases, there were just a few injuries, and the Israelis in general, the military is very risk adverse, and they're used to fighting very short wars, which we'll get into in a minute, and not fighting these long drawn out battles. And so the fear factor of now these IEDs being detonated and blowing up tank after tank in the south is something that will reshape the battlefield. Just to pull up again, if you look at a map here, the reason why the Israelis, by the way, want to seize South Lebanon up to the Litani River is very clear. If you look at it on a map, this is the Litani River, and you will notice that here it's very elevated. It's very mountainous terrain, and it acts as sort of a natural border. And so the Israelis have long been seeking this to seize up to this territory in order to expand their borders. Another thing is you can see the way that this terrain looks just from looking on Google Maps. Let's zoom out a little bit and just compare this to Gaza here. Gaza is completely flat. And this is very important because even when it comes to the tunnel infrastructure and when you're trying to bomb tunnels and you're trying to fight, Gaza is flat terrain. Now, there's a lot of buildings there and there's lots of rubble and places for the fighters in the Gaza Strip to hide. But Lebanon's terrain is much better for a defending force to fight out of. And it favors Hezbollah more than Gaza. The terrain there favors the Palestinian resistance groups. So that's something that I wanted to point out and keep in mind here. Another thing is when we're talking about the Israelis and how much they lie and the censorship and the fact that they don't want to admit any losses or very, very few losses like they were during the war. It was a ridiculously low amount. And at one point, the Israeli population started complaining because they were seeing for themselves that the casualties were way, way more than they were admitting. But it makes sense if you listen to Netanyahu's his advisor, his spokesperson advisor here, who just assumed his position. Take a listen to this and take a listen to the way that they talk. And this is this is somebody who is manufacturing propaganda for Netanyahu and manufacturing propaganda for the Israeli government. So it's important that we pay attention to the words that they're saying. He's speaking to an audience in Hebrew. And for some reason, the Israelis believe, I don't know whether they believe this or not, they just don't care. They think that if they say it in Hebrew and then in English, they say another thing that we don't know how to translate, and that this won't eventually reach the rest of the world. But of course, they continue to talk.
האמת לא משנה יותר, העובדות לא משנות יותר. בגלל זה, אגב, אני לא תמיד הייתי כזה, אני הפכתי להיות כזה. אני מברבל פייק ניוז כתגובה להם, אני לא הייתי כזה, מינה אותי רק האמת, אבל זה לא מעניין אותי, כי הגעתי למסקנה שאנחנו צריכים להיות טראמפ. האנשים האלה לא מבינים בטוב, הם מבינים רק במלחמה, ואתם רוצים מלחמה ברשתות? אנחנו ניתן לכם מלחמה ברשתות.
So with clips like that, it's the head of Netanyahu's press office talking there. When you see them admit this, there's a reason. They're trying to flood all different narratives through social media and try and see which one sticks. That's what they normally do. So they deny or obfuscate. In some cases, they put out alternative realities in order to try and trick you. While they're doing things like this. This is a video that was released by the Israelis. This is what they do in civilian areas. By the way, what you're watching here, before I pull it up, the Israeli military, what they do is they take old armored personnel carriers, which are out of commission, which they don't have any use for, and they're bringing a whole bunch of explosives inside of the armored personnel carriers and then detonating them. And they did this in Gaza as well, by the way. Again, the only purpose of this is destroying civilian infrastructure. There's no military purpose in what they're doing. And then they'll take videos of this and they'll post it online gleefully, like it's something to brag about. So that's what the Israelis have been doing in southern Lebanon during a so-called ceasefire period. Apparently that's a ceasefire to the Israelis, and we know that the Israelis don't care about so-called ceasefires, and they didn't in Gaza, and they didn't in Lebanon before, when Israel committed 15,400 violations within 15 months of the Lebanon ceasefire agreement. And although they might have not been as deep into Lebanese territory as they are now and being able to carry out these sorts of attacks, they were still bombing people's homes and destroying people's homes in the south of Lebanon. And again, the war didn't ever end in the south of Lebanon. It might have ended in the rest of the country, bar a few attacks here and there on the southern suburbs of Beirut and in the Bekaa. But in the south, it was an ongoing event. And like has happened in the past, the government basically abandoned the people of the south and did absolutely nothing other than attempt to disarm Hezbollah in the south of the Litani River, which of course they failed at doing. But just so everyone's aware, while Israel is carrying out operations like this, then this is the majority of what they do when they enter an area inside Lebanon, inside Gaza, wherever else. This is what they do. These are their objectives. Their objectives are not going into tunnels and fighting Hezbollah, and rooting them out and going after them and taking out the rocket launchers on the ground and all. No, none of that. They go in and they detonate civilians' homes. They blow up an entire area. They collectively punish a population and they force them out of their homes. 1.2 million people forced from their homes. And they tell them after the ceasefire is declared, the temporary ceasefire, that they can't come back to their homes. And so just so everyone's aware, and again, before I pull this up, we have to give the disclaimer that this is not an endorsement. This is for the audience's information, for their knowledge. this is one of the more recently released Hezbollah ambush videos in Beida against Israeli forces. And these are the sort of attacks that the Israelis are coming under when they're fighting Hezbollah. So this right here is a FPV drone, which the Israelis have had a lot of trouble dealing with, because this drone right here that they're using, it operates off of a fiber optic cable, and you can't jam them. And the Israelis can't actually locate them. They don't know that they're there in their vicinity most of the time until they physically see them, and they might hear them and look up. So the Israelis have had a really difficult time dealing with these FPV drones. So this is the footage that you're looking at. This is one of those drones finding its way to an Israeli target. Again, they're going to use anti-tank guided munition here to fire in a moment. But what you're seeing with that tank burning there, that black smoke that is burning, indicates that the whole tank, like that was a tank kill hit. Assuming now that the Israeli soldiers were in it, then we could assume that if they didn't get out in time, then this would have been devastating, and they would have had losses there, at the very least injuries. Obviously, we can't see, we don't know that it was moving, we don't know, we can't prove without a shadow of a doubt that the soldiers were in it. They could have exited it by that time. But when you see that black smoke rising from it and it's burning, that means that tank has been destroyed. So those are the sort of attacks that the Israelis are subjected to. And they don't actually know how to deal with this when it's coming in. Like, again, the Israelis don't actually have a plan for dealing with these sort of attacks. And again, I'm going to pull up this map because the Israelis put out a map of the Gaza Strip, which we'll look at in a bit, trying to depict how things are. Actually, I'm going to pull up the Gaza Strip first. So this is a recent map of the state of affairs in Gaza, where the Israeli forces are based. Also, as well, they say anti-Hamas militias in this graphic. But the reality is these groups that are based around in different parts, there's, they give them a little bit of a territory there. These are Israeli-created, ISIS-linked militia forces. Also, allegedly, they're being backed by the United Arab Emirates as well. And, this is all Israeli-controlled territory. These groups don't actually have any autonomy, and they're just cannon fodder to be used against the Palestinian resistance groups there in Gaza. But this actually, the so-called yellow line, which the Israelis, of course, have repeatedly violated and continue to take more territory. They control about 60% of the Gaza Strip at the moment. They were supposed to control 56%, but Israel, when you tell them ceasefire, they mean that means for the other side and not for themselves. That's how they interpret the word ceasefire. You keep firing on them and they stop. So when you look at this is actually an accurate representation. Hamas and the other Palestinian groups control the territory in here. The Israelis, roughly, give or take, it's not completely accurate, but they control this territory, right? And that if any of the Palestinian groups were to move into the Israeli-controlled zone, they get spotted by drones and they get hit immediately. So that's somewhat an accurate representation, not entirely, but of what the situation is in the Gaza Strip. And again, all of these areas are not actually, Israel is not present all over the place here. And it's using these militia forces to try and make sure and run patrols for it and do its dirty work. And also, aggress against different places in the Gaza Strip as well. And there's been a few cases of that, them even trying to kidnap civilians and haul them off into their trucks. And the Arrow forces, the Palestinian security force, the Arrow forces were specifically created to combat these ISIS-linked militia groups who first formed under Israeli supervision, and their job at the time was not fighting against Palestinian groups. It was seizing aid, looting aid trucks, and then sitting on that aid and drip feeding it to the black market to sell it at a profit. And these groups are composed of hardline Salafist types, criminals who are convicted of everything from murder to theft, drug trafficking, you name it. That's who these groups are that Israel is working with in Gaza. But shifting over here, if you look at this map that the Israelis have put out of South Lebanon, Israel does not control this territory. And the reason why I'm saying it doesn't control this territory is because Hezbollah could pop up at any moment, anywhere you're seeing in this red area of the map, and hit them. Because they haven't cleared the territory. They're like, we have full operational control in the area. Hezbollah is waiting for them. And there's a ceasefire period, so they're not doing this at the same intensity as before. They're not fighting them in the same way. But the Israelis, again, when they enter an area, they don't actually clear every single building. It's not like if the United States says that we've cleared an area and we've seized it. And even if you look and you compare this to the Ukraine war, it's not the same style of fighting. It's not to be interpreted as when you see these maps and the territory that's gained, allegedly, it's not, the Israelis are not in full control here. And what happened is, in the past, when the Israelis did have de facto control up to the Litani River, what they did, what happens is they had, like they have in Gaza now, they have a proxy force. They had what was called the South Lebanon Army, which operated as their proxies. And so in the year 2000, when Hezbollah managed to expel the Israeli occupiers, because at that time, up until 2000, from the 80s all the way up until 2000, when Hezbollah was waging their battle, their resistance against the Israelis on the ground, they were using these guerrilla warfare tactics, which now we see them implementing once again, but with better weapons against the Israelis. But when the Israelis were actually there in South Lebanon on the ground, they were using the South Lebanon army to their advantage, and they were eating constant ambushes and IEDs and all sorts. And I'm going to play some footage here. This is from recently came up for me, and is from an ambush in Khiyam, which I'll show you on the map here. Pull this back up. So, oh, what's happening here? So Khiyam, so everyone is aware, is up in this area right here. So back when the Israelis were occupying South Lebanon, this is some footage here from an ambush that was carried out against their forces back then. And obviously, I think there is a bit of, yeah. So just so everyone's aware, the reason I'm pulling up this footage is because there was a decades-long resistance which took place in the south of Lebanon after the Israelis had invaded in 1982 and killed around 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese, and then later declared an annexation or an occupation of the south of Lebanon using their Lebanese collaborator force known as the South Lebanon Army to help them in occupying this territory. So Hezbollah and the Amal movement and others, but obviously Hezbollah most prominently, had waged an armed struggle against the occupation up until the year 2000. And now what we're seeing in the significance of these IED attacks that we're seeing implemented now against the Israeli forces is that Hezbollah, the entire strategy here was to drag the Israelis deep into South Lebanon, because they know that the Israelis are not actually going to fully seize all of the territory that they're claiming to hold on to. They know that they don't know where the Hezbollah fighters are. They're too cowardly, quite frankly, to actually do what is needed to be done in order to defeat them. And so they're going to do what they're doing right now, destroying civilian infrastructure. And then Hezbollah will use these guerrilla warfare tactics in order to make it very costly for them. And the longer they stay in South Lebanon, they need to keep moving. This is something that they're having to learn on the job. The longer they stay there, the more Hezbollah can monitor them and anticipate their moves, their movement, and ambush them more effectively. And so now, opposed to before, when Hezbollah was not as sophisticated a fighting force, it didn't have the drone capabilities or even the anti-tank guided missiles and all of these things that it now possesses in its arsenal, as well as the know-how as well. It's going to be very difficult for them, the Israelis, in trying to maintain this so-called buffer zone. This is probably the best case scenario for Hezbollah, not the worst case scenario. And the reason why is invite them in and then drown them in the territory, use the land, asymmetric warfare. And the Israelis are going to, that's the whole purpose, drag them deep into Lebanon, make them bleed, and forced them to retreat. And just so people are aware, I'm going to pull up this here. This is from the Ansariya ambush that took place, where, and I pulled this up for a reason, because this here was the most deadly ambush launched against the Israelis in some time, when it occurred in the 1990s, in 1997. And what they're able to do here is, and again, this is the reason I pull it up. This wasn't just normal Israeli forces, the reservists, this was an Israeli special forces unit. And they anticipated where they were going to be, what the nature of their operation would be. They waited for them. Hezbollah ambushed them and killed 12 of their soldiers. It was a huge disaster for the Israelis when this happened. And so back then in 1997, we have to keep in mind that Hezbollah as a military organization was nowhere near as sophisticated as it is now. So if it could pull off things like this in 1997, it most certainly can do so today as well, these sort of ambushes. And that is where it's going to thrive. It's going to thrive on pulling off these ambushes, blowing up Israeli tanks like it's been doing with IEDs, and making it very, very costly for them and making them think twice. And this comes to the point which I pulled up earlier, which is that the Israelis themselves are not actually good at fighting long wars. And this goes back, by the way, I'll just pull this back up in a second. So the Israelis, their whole doctrine was shaped around the idea which David Ben-Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, came up with, that they need to fight short and intense wars. They cannot get embroiled in these long drawn out conflicts where it's a conflict of attrition. They can't afford it. And Ben-Gurion, his understanding of this and why he advocated for short wars, and then this was adopted by the Israelis later on, is because he knew that if it's just fighting against one enemy on a single front, or even on a few fronts for a short period of time, the Israelis would prevail. They have better military tech, they have better technology, they have a stronger military, and so that they can overcome their enemies. But if they're fighting a long drawn out war, in the long term, this is going to prove very costly for them, and they might lose because their enemies are a lot larger in numbers. Now what happened is, and this is why I'm pulling up this article, because this talks about the Israeli doctrine of fighting short wars, and now they've been dragged into a long war. And this is from the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. Here, like I highlight this for a reason. So they say that the first commandment of Israel's security concept was that Israel would never be able to force an end to the conflict on its antagonists because it is simply too small relative to the collective Arab and Muslim world. This approach created the dynamic of cycles of short wars. Israel was destined to mobilize for a significant clash once every few years to beat the enemy in a short and powerful war, and thereby gain a few years of relative calm. Israel used these periods of calm together with the assets it gained during the wars, time, territory, deterrence, strategic stability, to transform from a tiny country into a regional military and economic power. And so Israel is well adapted to these sort of wars, these very short wars. And if you look at its history, by the way, the 6-Day War, even last year, the 12-Day War, these are very short wars. In the Gaza Strip as well, they didn't want to fight much beyond a month ever, even though they were fighting a force in Gaza, which they were far superior to in terms of their technology and the size of their military and their power. They still didn't want to fight these long wars. But what happened along the way is that the Israelis in Lebanon had encountered an enormous problem because Hezbollah, as an anti-occupation force who were waging guerrilla warfare on the Israelis could now exact a price on the invading Israeli military that was too high for its society to pay. Hence the idea that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, came up with, that Israel is weaker than a spider's web. And the idea centers around that Israeli society cannot take the idea of large casualties like this. They are very weak. And we see this, by the way, the Israelis are obsessed with this. We went through this on the last live stream about Bint Jbil and why the Israelis are obsessed to take this specific area. And they continue to release statement after statement. Netanyahu has put a lot of emphasis on capturing Bint Jbil because that's where Nasrallah delivered this speech from. But they've never been able to fully overcome it, despite there's alleged victories against Hezbollah, because at the heart of that concept is that Israeli society can't take it. And if you see the populations of the north, Hezbollah developed a strategy which it implemented very well in this war. And that is to punish the north more than anything else. So the whole point is that those northern settlements, they're going to eventually clear out, and that they feel that the state has abandoned them. This is exactly what they feel. We saw a mass exodus from many of these areas, thousands and thousands of people leaving areas like Kiryat Shimona and complaining. We saw the mayors in the south of many of these settlements actively complaining that the government wasn't doing enough and that the military had lied to them about the blows that had been delivered to Hezbollah. And the reality is, it doesn't matter that even if Israel went all the way up to the Litani River in South Lebanon and claimed that it controlled this territory, which again, it doesn't control the territory, because Hezbollah is still going to operate there, even if Israel occupies all of the south of Lebanon up to the Litani River and it claims that it's reached it. And it does. Let's say it physically reaches the Litani River. Hezbollah will still fire rockets from south of the Litani River. It will still have that capability. It will still carry out ambushes. Its fighters will still be there. It still has tunnels there. And this concept of weaker than a spider's web continues to play out because they don't want to endure that. Whereas if you look at the population of South Lebanon, they're literally, trying to rebuild destroyed bridges which were bombed out so that they can pass across the Litani River and get back to their bombed out homes and put a tent next to it. And in Gaza, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing in Gaza. They will go back to their destroyed home and put a tent next to it. But the Israelis, if there's sirens, all life stops and they're screaming and complaining and publicly crying on television about it. And so that theory holds weight still because of this. And like the whole thing about a spider's web and how weak it is, this was the crux of the argument. The crux of the argument is its weakness. And part of that is because Israel was conditioned to fight short but intense wars. And now it's fighting wars that are going for a lot longer, or they're on and off for a very long period of time. Because since October 7, they got jolted back into reality. When they cleared out of Lebanon in the year 2000, they then believed, after Hezbollah had carried out an ambush on Israeli forces and taken some of their bodies captive, the Israelis believed that they could go in and fight a short war, an intense war against Hezbollah in 2006. And, even within about 30 days, they did reach the Litani River. But the problem that they faced is they were suffering quite a lot of casualties, and they knew that occupying South Lebanon would be very, very costly for them. And they were facing fierce resistance. So this created a situation where Israel, with its short and intense wars every few years, had now had to accept the fact that they couldn't accept the consequences of this doctrine which they had developed. because Hezbollah was too strong for that. And Hezbollah would continue to go again and again and again and fight them with great intensity and inflict serious losses on them. So they didn't want to do this, especially after their tank massacre in 2006. They lost a lot of tanks, which at the time they were telling everyone the Merkava tank, nothing can stop it rolling, and that it couldn't be touched in South Lebanon. And then we saw what happened to them. They would all burn, dozens and dozens of them taken out, which was a shock to everyone. So what Israel did is it decided, okay, we'll withdraw, we'll fight our short war, and they developed the Dahiya doctrine. Now, the Dahiya doctrine was, we will inflict maximum damage on the civilian population. This is how they ended the 2006 Lebanon war. We will inflict massive damage and destruction and casualties on the civilian population as to deter any future war against us, as to deter military action, and to inflict a psychological blow and hopefully turn that population against the resistance movements that they are supporting. In Lebanon, they withdrew. And really what happened is this deterrence capacity faded. Hezbollah had achieved the deterrence because Israel was no longer wanting to engage in a war, which was going to be costly. To do what they need to do against Hezbollah, it's going to take a long time and it's going to be very costly. And they knew this. Even back then in 2006, its capabilities are way more than they were back then now. But they knew that. So about 17 years, there was an equation of deterrence where Lebanon deterred Israel. But Israel, they didn't want to accept that. So what they did is they took the Dahiya doctrine, they took the theory of short wars, and then they applied that to the Gaza Strip. Because what happened in the Gaza Strip? Well, in 2006, they did bomb Gaza, but also something else happened around that time. In 2007, after the legislative elections, which Hamas won in a landslide, which, by the way, it was actually the Bush administration that pushed Hamas to even engage in these elections. They didn't really know that it was going to win. That aside, the Bush administration had backed a Palestinian Authority-led coup, a coup led by the then head of the preventative security forces, Mohammed Dahlan. And Dahlan, who is now like the head of intelligence for the United Arab Emirates, by the way, after he was sort of had a feud with the Palestinian Authority and was booted and made persona non grata amongst the Palestinian Authority. But at the time, he had planned to carry out a coup against Hamas because they had won, and then suddenly there was this force that rejected Oslo, rejected normalizing, rejected two states, wanted to recapture all of Palestine, which was in Gaza. That failed. Hamas took over all of the Gaza Strip in 2007. And this created what's known as the Palestinian Civil War. So without going into that history so much, the Israelis, what they did is in 2008-9, they launched their first major massacre on the Gaza Strip. And at the time, they said explicitly, this is revenge for Lebanon. Officials came out and said this at the time. And the idea was they were going to achieve this deterrence capacity against the Palestinian groups. Now, 2008-9, Palestinian groups, again with their weapons, they've never actually had access to great weapons, like very powerful weapons, but their rocket capacity wasn't very much. It wasn't very powerful, but the Israelis wanted to use them as a punching bag. So they prepared. They believed that, Gaza was weak to the point where their population could accept the results of attacking Gaza. Because the Palestinian groups might fire a few rockets here and there, the sirens might go off, some Israeli settlers might get killed, but it's not that bad for them. In fact, they can go on a boat tour and watch Gaza bombed, and they can go and do sightseeing, right? It's like an attraction for them watching Gaza getting bombed. And they made fun of Gaza, and they developed this whole theory that with Gaza, every few years they go in, And you might have heard this, they will mow the lawn. So what did this mowing the lawn entail? The Dahiya doctrine, mowing the lawn. Because again, they didn't want to really go in and actually defeat Hamas on the ground. At the end of the day, it's going to cost soldiers. They did go in on the ground. Eventually what happened, though, is that in 2012, the war there, things started getting a little bit different. And the threat level started rising a little bit from Gaza. And then in 2014, they actually did wage a ground campaign inside Gaza, and they suffered a lot of casualties. They suffered a lot. So over 40 soldiers were killed, and they just invaded one area. Then they tried to go into Shujaiya. Soldiers were suddenly captured. Loads of their soldiers got killed. It was massive disaster for the Israeli military at the time. And so what happened is Hamas was still not strong enough, and the other Palestinian groups were still not strong enough to really burden Israeli society. So they withdrew. They knew that going in on the ground against the Palestinians wasn't a very good idea, especially because of the tunnel networks. And they just continued to implement the Dahiya doctrine, bomb their civilians, kill their civilians in large numbers. And over the years, periodically, even though the wars weren't as big as 2014, they would commit these massacres against the civilian population and occasionally do targeted assassinations against leading figures within groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas and the PFLP, DFLP, others. But what happened is on October 7, 2023, they realized that this strategy and this so-called deterrence capacity was an illusion. They realized, it came back to bite them, that bombing Gaza and killing a few thousand civilians every few years was not going to do the trick. And so what happened that day on October 7, everyone focuses on, the Israelis, so many Israelis, civilian casualties and all of this. What really, really irked the Israelis, and I believe was the main contributor to the Israeli instant decision of the Israeli leadership to implement a policy of genocide in Gaza, was the fact that their southern command collapsed. Hundreds of their soldiers were killed by a few thousand Palestinian fighters who were armed with light weapons that they produced domestically. And that collapsed this whole idea of their security doctrine and all of the rest of it, and that we can just go in and commit a massacre every few years and our deterrence capacity is restored, and the Palestinians can't do that much damage to us. Well, the Palestinians did do a lot of damage, and the conditions in Gaza caught up to Israel. And then they decided, now we need to develop another strategy. And this is what you see now being discussed in these Israeli think tanks and these study centers, that they're talking about what happened in the post-October 7 world, right? They're very hyper fixated on October 7. This is a piece, by the way, which is talking about the long war phenomenon and the need for a new Israeli security concept. And all of this, again, is very much linked to the October 7 disaster that befell the Israelis. It's very much linked to that. So now they've had to try and adapt to this strategy of long wars. So they want to go back into South Lebanon like they did in the 80s to occupy South Lebanon and have a buffer zone, with a lot less people because they want to ethnically cleanse a whole bunch of them. But they want to go in there and they want to control this zone. And this is going to be extremely costly because, again, the Israelis have never developed any strategy to be able to deal with Hezbollah. They believed that what they were doing in Gaza had restored their deterrence capacity, so-called, which is making everyone fearful of them. And one of the real reasons that they committed the Gaza genocide is not just vengeance, it's a strategy. And the strategy of the Gaza genocide is, again, to show the whole Arab world, the Muslim world, how psychotic they are, how powerful they are, and what they'll do to anyone that stands up to them. In other words, they took the Dahiya doctrine and they put it on steroids. That's what they did. And so now they're suffering because of this in Lebanon. They really are. And in Lebanon, by the way, this is interesting. I'm just going to pull this up here for a second. The Lebanese Hezbollah actually has its hands on military equipment, which was previously in the hands of the Syrian Arab Army. And this video, which I'm about to pull up, is of a M46 130 millimeter artillery cannon. This video shocked a lot of people that they had this sort of heavy artillery, but they've actually acquired a lot of equipment from Syria, especially after the fall of the Syrian Arab Army in December of 2024. The Lebanese groups managed to, well, Hezbollah managed to acquire this sort of equipment. It's not clear whether this was acquired before or after that, but it's very clear that this was formerly part of the Syrian Arab Army's arsenal.
تحتلوش الهم يا رجال، ما بتنهز، لا تأخذها في الله لومة لائم يا صاحب الزمان، انتظار عند الظن. نوايا هذه المهمة كلها مان تيجي للسيدة الزهراء وبدها هي تعمل. يا صاحب الزمان يا فاطمة الزهراء، اللي خص راسك اليد شوي، قولوا يا رب، قولوا يا رب. يا صاحب الزمان يا فاطمة الزهراء، يا حيدر الكرار، يا ذاهب القلب. ايش حالك هيك؟ ايزي يا صاحب الزمان يا فاطمة الزهراء، يا فاطمة الزهراء، يا فاطمة الزهراء. يلا محمد. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. يا حسين، يا أمير المؤمنين، وما رميت ولكن الله رمى. يا زهراء، يا فاطمة الزهراء، الله أكبر.
So I thought that would be interesting just to show you all this, demonstrate the sort of equipment that Hezbollah has in its hands. So shifting away from that slightly, but sticking on South Lebanon, many people may have seen the images which came out of South Lebanon. Now, I believe this is a slightly older video that came out, but the Israeli military nonetheless even confirmed it for themselves. The Israeli military decided to pull down a statue of Jesus that Christian Lebanese villagers in the south had put up. And today, according to Israeli state media, this soldier was not even punished. He received a warning. He was not prosecuted for doing this. The reason why I focus on this is because a lot of people see Hezbollah, especially Western audiences, and think, okay, this is Muslims, radical Muslims fighting against, Israel, and their propaganda is the only democracy in the Middle East. So it's important to know what Israel is doing here and how it actually does view the Christian population of the region and what it does to them. Because again, it's the second time now this year because again, you note the date here, Israel in 2024 targeted a historic shrine, a Christian shrine in southern Lebanon. And they did it again during this war. Now, what's the purpose here for doing something like this, right? For targeting statues, for targeting shrines? Like, why would you do something like this? And the answer is very clear. It's the same reason why Daesh or ISIS targeted shrines, targeted symbols, targeted historical sites, because Israel is infamous for doing this, for blowing up historical buildings, shrines, defacing and churches and mosques. All the same. Churches and mosques are defaced, defiled, destroyed, all the same. And the other major group which has been largely responsible for this sort of behavior has been Daesh. And again, the Israelis, they said, we're not finished against Hezbollah yet. But when they're busy in South Lebanon, what are they doing? They're destroying civilian sites. They're destroying sites that belong to Christians, to Muslims, trying to expel and destroy the evidence of the heritage of the region. That's why they have this, the archaeologists and the narratives that they put out about, uncovering secret links to, biblical Israel and all of this. This is a big focus of the Israelis, trying to prove that they existed there, trying to prove their status there. And if you look at the way that they behave like Daesh. And Daesh as well has absolutely no grounding in Islamic history. It's destroying all of these sites that go back thousands of years, when it's attacking Christian sites and Muslim sites, by the way, and Muslim sites. When these groups go ahead and do this, they're trying to destroy the heritage. They're trying to destroy the culture. They're destroying the evidence. It's like book burning to try and justify their presence there, because it's an inorganic presence. And a lot of people say, well, we'll blame this on religion and radical religion. Before we get to that point in a second, I want to show people Hezbollah in comparison and the way that it deals with the Christian population, because I think that this is very key. It's very crucial. Hezbollah is a political party inside of Lebanon, by the way. Hezbollah has fought side by side with the Lebanese army to combat Daesh coming into Lebanon and invading Lebanese territory. They actually saved the Lebanese army in many cases. And the Christian populations that they encounter, do you think that Hezbollah maybe, with the way that they're portrayed, in every Western country, they're a designated terrorist organization. Only Western countries, really, to be honest. Most of the world doesn't actually consider them a terrorist organization. But if you live in the West, they are a terrorist organization. So you would think that a terrorist organization, when compared to the only democracy in the Middle East, which we're told Christians are supposed to love and be friendly towards, because this is, something important to them, the modern state of Israel, which came into existence due to atheists who wanted to build up a new nationalist identity amongst Jewish people. But we'll not go into that. You'd be led to believe that Hezbollah must hate Christians. They must persecute Christians. But that's not the case. In fact, many Christians celebrate them. Many Christians not only are supportive of them in Lebanon, but they actually have Christians in their ranks fighting for them. And in fact, there was an Armenian Hezbollah member, Armenian Christian Hezbollah member, who was killed during the battles a few weeks ago, which had been published, and it got some attention online. But this is what happened, and this is what the people of a area called Ma'lula, which is in Syria, and was taken over originally by the Al-Qaeda-linked opposition groups, some of these Al-Qaeda-linked opposition groups in Syria, but then by Daesh, they entered. And this is what the Christians, this is a low-quality video, by the way, but this is what some of the Christians interviewed there described Hezbollah as, because Hezbollah were, they played a large role on the ground in recapturing the area from Daesh and these Al-Qaeda-linked groups that had seized the area.
Nosotras estábamos en la pequeña capilla cuando oímos la alegría de Hezbollah diciendo y también avisándonos que estábamos liberados por la gracia de Dios.
So when a man came in all with water because it was raining, he said, "طلعوا ما في شيء. وضع مرتاح."
Con el plan de cantar una canción de paz. Al mismo tiempo está la alegría porque fueron 10 amigos que vinieron a ayudarnos. Enseguida toda la movilidad de Hezbollah para con nosotros. Teníamos agua, entonces lo único que tomábamos era leche. En este sentido, Hezbollah, por supuesto, cuando supo que nosotros no teníamos agua, no teníamos comida, realmente nos ayudaron. Es decir, de una manera, pero de una manera humilde. Es decir, no como de una persona que viene acá a dar ayuda, al contrario. Utilizaron una palabra muy bonita, es decir, compartir con ellos nuestras cosas.
Entonces, para mí fue impresionante de ver eso, cómo primero es Dios a quien agradecemos, así que la impresión que tengo de Hezbollah es verdaderamente como ángeles que están para servir a Dios y a cada uno de las personas de forma gratuita. Yo creo que no tengo otra palabra para expresar en relación a ellos, sino...
So the reason I pull that up here is because, again, you can take that how you want. And some people have, problems, like especially from Hezbollah's role in Syria with Hezbollah, but there is no doubt that the way that Hezbollah has dealt with Christians in comparison to the Israelis, it's night and day. And in fact, if you look, and again, just to show you in Arabi, let's say popular culture, I'll just play a clip of this here because it's important to demonstrate. So one of the most famous singers in the Arabic language, her name is Julia Boutros, and this is one of the songs. I'll just show you briefly. This is a live version of it here. But there are many songs that she performed, and there's many other artists as well. And she's Christian, by the way, supporting Hezbollah very, very explicitly. So I'll play just a clip of this quickly, just so people can get the idea of it. And then we'll continue here. So I'll stop that there. Just so everyone is aware, the reason I play that is because, again, even when it comes to popular culture, and especially after 2006, the Syrian war and the sectarian tensions that occurred then changed some popular opinion. But for the longest time, Hezbollah was popular amongst the vast majority of the people. The vast majority of the Arab world adored Hezbollah. And again, this came from Christians, it came from Sunni and Shia, everyone across the region. Now, Israel has a plan and has implemented a plan to divide people across the region. And people have their different perspectives on that. I don't think that's a topic for today's live stream. But ultimately, the way that Hezbollah is portrayed in the West, of this kooky, crazy group that must be killing all of the Christians and hate the Christians, it's the very opposite. It's the very opposite. There are so many Christians that still support them, the biggest political party there. And the idea that they are somehow opposed to their own countrymen is ludicrous, quite frankly. These are ludicrous arguments. And now you'll see people, and I'll play the clip here of Lindsey Graham talking about this, because the United States, the US government, wants the commander of the Lebanese army, under the guidance of Nawaf Salam, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and Joseph Aoun, who is the President of Lebanon. I mean, we call them the President and Prime Minister of Lebanon. They're not really, the President and Prime Minister of Lebanon in any real way, because they're just puppets for the United States, and they do what they're told. They don't have any authority, really. Nothing they say has any weight, to be honest, at this point. And the reason I say this, and I will treat it this way, is because they're going to normalize. They want to engage in normalization talks. They wanted to have direct meetings with the Israelis. They had this big spectacle in Washington. And their picks, by the way, the only one standing in their way of achieving their goal of fomenting some sort of a civil war conflict is the commander of the Lebanese army, Rudolf Heikel. And Commander Heikel, he said, no, I won't go after Hezbollah, especially during the war. And I'm not going to go and take the country to a state of civil war, contrary to what Nawaf Salam may want to order and implement a US drawn up plan to pull the country into a civil war. And then you have people like Lindsey Graham, who's never seen a war he didn't like, advocating for a coup against the commander of the Lebanese army. And again, before I play this, Hezbollah has fought historically on the side of the Lebanese army, because the Lebanese army is not allowed to fight Israel. They just withdraw. Doesn't matter if their soldiers are killed, like they were in 2024, and they were as well in the past weeks, and their security forces are killed. It doesn't matter. The Lebanese army will get the orders to withdraw. And like Tom Barak publicly said in an interview, and he laughed about it, the US is not arming them to fight Israel. They're arming them to fight their own people, right? But the Lebanese army, still amongst them, there's a lot of respect for Hezbollah because they fought on their side to defeat Daesh and to stop Lebanon from being taken over by these Takfiri militants. And so, here's Lindsey Graham coming along and calling for a coup.
In Lebanon that doesn't lead to the disarmament and defanging of Hezbollah. I do not trust the Lebanese military to disarm Hezbollah. The commander of the Lebanese military, Heikel, I think his name is, I don't trust as far as I can throw him.
Doesn't even know his name. He did storm out of a room that he was sitting in when Commander Heikel, he decided not to call Hezbollah a terrorist organization. Apparently, Lindsey Graham stormed out of a room when he refused to conform to that language. But yeah, we'll continue.
He needs to be replaced before there's a credible plan to disarm Hezbollah. No peace deal in Lebanon until there's a credible pathway to disarm Hezbollah.
So the US government wants to create a civil war conflict inside of Lebanon. That's the whole purpose here. They want to have Hezbollah fighting against the Lebanese army. And by the way, it won't turn out like that. Most likely what will happen is the Lebanese army will split. and it will become factions, and a large portion of it will be on the side of Hezbollah. So you're talking about the disintegration of a state altogether. But, the Lebanese government now is just on the orders of the United States. And it's not like before, some people would say, well, before with Hariri, the former prime minister, look at how he was kidnapped by the Saudis and he was owned by them. If you look at Hariri, the family itself was, prominent and sort of answered to someone. Who is Nawaf Salam? Inside of Lebanon, this is something that matters, right? Is like these people actually have bases of support inside the country. There are people who support them, and there's funds that come in from different countries to back these groups. That's how it sort of works. Nawaf Salam was just plucked, off the International Court of Justice and flown into this position. He was sort of introduced to this position because that's where he was before. He was in the International Court of Justice. He was one of the judges. And so this is just somebody that is just completely complicit. And just to give you an example from history, in 1982, there was a president of Lebanon, Bashir Gemayel, and there were signs that he wanted to normalize ties with the Israelis. He had very strong connections to the Israelis. Former head of the Kataib or Phalange party, responsible. These are fascist militias, which were supported by the Israelis and the Saudis, by the way. They received support from the Saudis too, we found out. And so he had taken place. I don't think he survived even a few weeks. He was assassinated by a fellow Maronite Christian who was part of the SSNP, the Syrian Socialist National Party, in a bombing attack. Because, again, he had sought. Now, he adopted a public position of not wanting to normalize. He wanted an agreement with the Israelis, a non-aggression agreement with the Israelis, but there was an understanding from the public that he was close to them and that perhaps he was going to try and normalize ties with the Israelis. And this was a big problem for the public, the Lebanese public, who had just witnessed the Israelis invade Beirut and come into the country in 1982. They were under attack, that 20,000 people were ultimately killed. Horrible things had happened. And then later in September, which I believe he was also killed in September, a few days before, there was Sabra and Shatila just after that. But there were other massacres that were carried out. So people were not going to accept that inside of Lebanon, and he was killed very, very, very quickly. And he didn't even go publicly as far as what the current Lebanese government has gone. And so there are concerns that there could be assassination attempts against them. And that's why Nawaf Salam has a massive security detail now. People started coming out into the streets and protesting. And the reason why they're protesting is very clear. Like 2,300 Lebanese have just been killed by the Israelis. Again, they've bombed mosques and churches, wiped out entire villages, bombed ambulances, medical clinics, murdered women and children in large numbers, bombed the capital, government buildings, killed army personnel, security forces, killed UN forces even. And the government is focused on disarming Hezbollah and is focused on normalizing ties with Israel. With what benefit? Even the Israelis are looking at it and asking, well, what is even really the benefit other than a propaganda victory? I mean, it's so extreme that the situation, unfortunately, is at a boiling point. Because right now, things are not going to explode, but it takes one person to be assassinated. It takes, a group of protesters to come out and someone to start shooting at them for the situation to start exploding. And that is the fear. That's the Israelis are openly talking about, wanting to push Lebanon into this direction. Perhaps there's a lot more to go into and some of the historical elements of this as well, which we might discuss next time on another stream. But thank you for tuning in. Do remember that these streams are happening every Monday at the same time. So if you do want to tune in and get more analysis and the latest updates, and of course, the war is still raging on in Lebanon currently. So I encourage everyone to hit that like button. Please share this as well. And if you did like it, drop a comment and stay tuned, because we'll be back again next week. Same place and the same time. And thank you for being here with us today.